Good. How are you guys?
And then I almost drowned it.
Are you well?
I put my hand on
Yes, we are, ma'am.
climbed up the stairs.
Hello?
Hello, Teacher Mary.
Hello.
Hi.
And I got
Cool,
some
cool.
in my mouth.
Let me just get this open. I'll just share my screen. And then we can get started.
Tell me, what is this?
Oh. Okay, let's close this. All right, I'm just going to start this from here. Okay, so we're going to look more deeply into radio and current affairs. You'll be familiar with current affairs programs, I'm sure. But many South African radio stations carry current affairs shows which help unpack news stories. News and current affairs aren't necessarily the same thing, but they often feed into one another. Okay. So we're just looking back on the most important improvements that you feel you've made in your radio interviewing skills. Has the previous lesson assisted you with in terms of identifying people to interview and also mechanisms of doing it effectively? So just something to think about. Those are your learning outcomes. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to stay up to date on your own with current affairs and events. That means like listening to the radio, that's your best source of current affairs news. Keeping it tuned in your vehicle when you're driving around or at home, so that you have that. Be able to cater for an ever-growing audience of listeners and viewers. Understand current affairs radio to a degree where you're capable of potentially working in a radio news environment. I'm telling you that nothing can prepare you for what a radio news environment looks like. When you set foot into it, it's busy, and it's cutthroat, and it's every man for himself and God for us all. It's that kind of situation, because everything needs to happen yesterday, and you're late by 5 seconds, and that really makes a difference. So very punctual people as well that work in radio, because you have to do things by the minute. You know how much words can fit into a minute, as opposed to newspaper journalists knowing how many words fit in an article, for example. So also you should be able to discuss the development of current affairs in broadcasting, like where it started and how it grew, and where it is now. Explore current affairs programs offered on the various radio channels. So try and be as broad in your listening as possible. Okay, so this is basically a map of what we're going to be touching on in this lecture. Again, Chignell is going to come up prominently. So make sure that you do read the reading material to really equip yourself, so that when you come to the lecture, you have some understanding of the elements that we're going to be discussing. Okay, someone's mic is on. Let's see. Hello? Oh, okay. Okay, key concepts: history of talk radio, origins of current affairs radio, analysis and politics, and then new challenges for current affairs radio. Like I mentioned, where we started, where we are now. All right. Key concepts. Okay, so we obviously centered on the British way of doing broadcasting. I mean, they're probably the first people that I think they invented radio. So it comes from there. And so we follow a lot of their models, also specifically with regards to current affairs broadcasting. So the UK's broadcasting system divides factual news from comment and analysis programs. We don't necessarily do that here. You need to have a good understanding. Well, you know that when you get your news bulletin at the top of the hour, that's your facts. And then that is separate from your comment and analysis programs where they'll tell you such and such person is on the air now. His comment, is not reflecting on us as a station. It doesn't mean we believe what he's speaking about, or she. So there's a separation there. Sorry, my mistake. And with our news, you find a similar thing where you have your factual news, your news headlines, your news bulletin at the top of the hour, and then your comment and analysis making up the rest of the skeleton. So some UK radio programs devote 30 to 40 minutes to a scripted examination of a single issue. Topics can include oil spills, arms smugglers, banks not offering loans, and who should bear the brunt of government spending cuts. So that is more or less what you would call, because we're talking scripted here, what you would call your radio package, where they would have multiple sources or multiple voices speaking on a particular issue. And as a journalist myself, a practicing journalist, you are exposed to all these different kinds of news coming in from different sources, and you need to be able to identify who to speak to about what and what kind of questions to ask that individual before you even call them to set up the interview. That's how prepared you should be. You read up every shred of information you can find on the interview subject, and you make sure that you put good questions that are going to elicit the right kinds of responses, the right emotions. It's going to tell the right kind of story, the story that you want to tell. So that's just an example of what I've experienced in my work. And then the US broadcasting system is obviously different. You go left, they go right. So they integrate their news and their comment into one. So you're not, as a listener, entirely sure that what you're consuming is factual, or it's partly tainted by somebody's recollection of something that may have happened 50 years ago, kind of a situation. And I think I like our system better because you know what you're getting, and you know what to expect, or you should. And then I want you to think critically about what kind of method have we adopted in South Africa. I mean, it's quite clear to me, but I'm not sure if you guys have any comment on that. Okay. Now let's unpack the history of talk radio. In 1920s Britain, families would gather around radios to listen together. But my dad tells a similar story here of what it was like in the 1920s, like early times. Well, obviously he wasn't around then. But my point is that in the early days, even in my dad's days in the 50s, growing up in South Africa, they would gather around the radio like well, we don't really gather around the TV anymore. I think we don't gather. We just kind of sit on our phones. But it's interesting to see how that evolves. But radio used to be the hot thing, and everyone used to listen together. And so the BBC began to provide more than just factual news because the audience was craving something different. And so they moved beyond pure reporting and produced talks about current events and other topics. So they'd have like a panel of experts on climate change. Okay, there was no climate change in those days, but I'm just saying. And they would debate the topic on air, and it made for very good radio, because the listener would follow in on the conversation and engage with the speaker, in a deeply personal way. And I think that was the magic of radio. And I like what they say here, that in the 1930s, Hilda Matheson pioneered a new radio voice. If I can just tell you a small little anecdote. So I'm colored, right? And when I when I started working, there's something at the end called the SOQ, the standard out cue, that you make at the end of your news report, where you basically say your name and the radio station you work for and where you are. So mine was Candice Klein, SABC News, Johannesburg. But the way I say it would change when I had the microphone in front of me. So if I say it to you now, it's not the same as if I say it to you with a microphone in front of me. And people used to make so much fun of me. It is like, I think it's still a source of amusement amongst my colleagues now, because my grandmother once said to me that she thought that was a white person. When I first asked her to listen to me on the radio, she's like, I thought that was a white person. So just, it's just interesting when you're thinking about this lady pioneering that voice, because that's what you're trying to do, something less formal and more intimate. And I was going the complete opposite of everything. So the next shake-up occurred with World War II, where BBC listeners preferred conversational and opinionated talk radio content from continental Europe. So they decide, the audience is the boss. They say such and such, you do whatever they say. And they hired a novelist, and he completely revolutionized UK talk radio once more by discussing major issues in a relatable rather than patronizing manner. Now, that's the thing about the voice. The voice is a very powerful tool. It's not just the words that it carries, but your tone. You can tell if somebody's happy or sad based on the sound of their voice and the inflection of their voice. So voice is very, 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 very powerful, and it carries with it meaning beyond just the words that are being expressed. And so when we're talking about relatable, don't talk down to your listener. If something is obvious, don't you know what I mean? Don't spell it out for them. You know what I mean? Try and be relatable. Try and be conversational. That's the biggest compliment that you'll ever be paid if you ever were to decide that radio is where your journalistic home is going to be. Sorry, I forget my train of thought. Yeah, you need to always be relatable as an individual. You need to be somebody that somebody can have a conversation with. It's like I was taught in the beginning also, the first thing that you must do when you're reporting and you're thinking about, maybe you're a bit nervous to report for the first time because you're thinking of the thousands, or in my case, because I worked at the SABC, the millions of people that were listening to you. And I was told, just imagine your grandmother is standing in front of you and explain the story to her. No big words, no fancy language, just simple, plain English or Afrikaans or Sesotho or isiZulu, just plain, exactly the way they need to understand it. You don't have to simplify it for them or anything like that. Just keep it simple. So the question there that you can consider, which radio stations do you find stuffy and boring? Remember, you exploring all these radio stations in your free time, and this will facilitate how you're able to answer these questions if they come up. You never know. Origins of current affairs radio. Okay. So before the 1960s, it was believed that radio should be purely factual, just the news, nothing else, no comment. Comment and speculation should be kept separate and it should be labeled. But in the 1960s, this approach evolved in the UK, and specific programs combined the approach to become more similar to modern talk radio content. So journalist William Hardcastle, and I found this quite interesting, pioneered the use of vox pops, or voice of the people. Just to pause there. That was the first, one of my first aha moments when I started at the SABC was this vox pops. Just send Candace to get us some vox pops. And there'd be an issue, for example, the petrol price was going up at midnight. So send Candace to go and get the vox pops. Off I go with my microphone, and I'm standing at the petrol station, and there's queues of cars, and I'm interviewing the motorists. Oh no, this is crazy. This is the second increase in the last 5 days. We can't do this anymore, blah, blah. And I take that sound back to the office and I compile it into what they say there is vox pops. It's about 40 seconds long. Maybe you can squeeze 4 people in there, but like really squeeze. So each person would take up, say, 10 seconds of the vox. That's actually quite a lot of space in radio. And then that would then be utilized as vox pops and would be played on air. So they'll have a story saying the petrol price is going up by X amount. We spoke to motorists at Joburg petrol station, and then you play the thing, boom shakalaka, everyone's very happy. Vox pops. And I like the word vox pops, voice of the people. Because you're really getting the voice of the people. You're getting down to the ordinary people, and you're talking to them and you're asking them about their issues, and you're getting the information.
Okay. Candace,
yeah.
Do you find that with the radio, current affairs radio, recently there's not enough like voices of the people. It's just like when you're listening to like news bulletins, it's just it's just this happened and that happened and that happened. See you at the next top of the hour. So it's we don't hear the voices of the people. Do you know why is that?
That's a very, very interesting observation. I didn't notice that. I kind of took my eye off the news ball for a couple of months, so I'm not as sharp as I should be. But if you've noticed that, that's definitely something to chase and to interrogate, because that should be the lifeblood. Your show should be as interactive as possible. And that's a good way for you as a station to get your name out there. Because we're not just talking about you as a journalist, we're talking about you as a station owner one day. Don't limit yourself. Journalists are just one cog in the wheel, as it were. But on the vox pops, I definitely think it's very important and it should be more prominent. I think it's just because it's the kind of sources that journalists are going for are all the same kind of sources. So we don't have like a radio station that's really pioneering and really standing out and saying this is what we do. We get the voice of the people, Vox Pops FM, or whatever the case might be, and they go out there and they make sure that every story they get comment on. But in a radio news environment, there's a limited number of bulletins in the day, and there's a limited number of stories that can be run in each bulletin, right? And it's limited space for each story. So it's very constructed. And what makes that significant is that there's a limit to the kind of stories that will make it to the top. Some are not going to. Sometimes there's a really nice story with vox pops, but then a fire breaks out, and it's at a old age home, and that's going to cancel you out. That's going to be the top story that everyone's going to talk about for the next week. Remember when Parliament burnt down? Same thing. Where we see that maybe there are good voice of the people stories, like really solid stories where people are storytellers and, just take you on an adventure into their home villages or whatever the case might be. Nice stories. But then other stories break and they get bumped down all the way to the bottom. Some of them just never ever recover. But that's a good point to raise. I don't know if this answers your question, but definitely something that you should keep thinking about. And if you are interested in radio, and you end up in a radio news environment, then try to think of ways that you could maybe bring that vox in a story. For instance, say it's a story about the price of potatoes, and you go out and you interview people instead of interviewing an economist or a farmer. You know what I mean? It's about how you shift your news focus and how you look at your sources. Who should I speak to on a story? Do I want the voice of the people, or do I need an expert? Excuse me. Okay?
Yeah, no, I understand. No, yeah, you answered me. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm glad. Sometimes I can go on and on. So, and then the telephone interview for local news editors to contribute during a broadcast. Telephone interviews are pretty crucial for radio, because radio, remember, it's all about now. Like yesterday, you're 5 seconds late. I'll drill that into your head, because that is how it is. It's hectic. And the telephone interview is your sharpest tool, because you can find out about a body being discovered in Boxburg Lake, and you can get sound on that story and have it at the top of the hour before the newspaper journalist has time to get into his car and drive there. That's how fast radio is. And all you need is, so your telephone is your instrument, your microphone is your second instrument. They're equally important. It's however you're going to get that sound, because sound is what makes radio. Don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me about something, show me how good it is. Right. So and then this became a news sequence for radio, where they'd have telephone interviews with editors contributing, or you'd have bulletins with editors contributing, and that would be kind of like the context that we talking of. Just hold on 2 seconds. I just need to.
I practice cheering every day since then. I also do Krakow. It's all about the legs.
Oops.
Well, I like this Krakow. And
Just hold on for me for 2 seconds. Just hold on 2 seconds. Lila? Hey, it's on now.
Mommy, but that one, what did he put them instead so that you don't have to. I paused it because your headphones kept on saying, because these earmuffs, because these stuffs kept on saying, hold on, hold on.
Oh, is that so?
Is that because you are saying hold on? I heard it. Daddy? Hold on. Say hold on. Is Daddy coming?
Oh, gosh. So sorry, ladies. Okay.
Hold on.
So by the end of the 60s, reactionary hard news programs re-emerged. Now, I'm just going to pause there so we can look at those words. Reactionary. So a lot of your news that you have today, and I challenge you to try and correct me on this, are responding to stuff that happened. So somebody, for example, with a minister, the finance minister being accused of sexual assault by a masseuse, at a hotel in the Kruger, and his denials and whatever. That story originated from a statement by the minister himself. Sorry, you can hear that, I'm sure. Let me just put that a bit softer. Come on, put it softer, baby.
Mama. Easy, friend. Easy.
Okay. Just hold on 2 seconds. And yeah, that's my challenge. So that was the media reacting to that, then became the news story. The media would say something along the lines of, most media houses say something along the lines of, the Minister of Finance has denied allegations that he sexually assaulted a masseuse, bloody blue. This is his version of events. His wife was there. All this situations. If you didn't know about it, you can look at it. But that's what I mean by reactionary. So we don't create the news. We don't create news as journalists and then report on ourselves or report on each other. We respond to events that happen in the environment. Crimes happen, fires happen. What do? We go to the scene. That's what a journalist will do. Hard news, 24 hours, crime, journalists, that's what they do. They're on the road all the time. They've got suits in their cars, they've got heels in their cars, they've got makeup in their cars. They can move from slacks and a t-shirt during the day, covering a protest, to a business wear in the afternoon, going to a press conference, to a nightgown in the evening, going to some high-powered function to get sound for a story that you're doing. So this is what we're talking about, that constant, being on that constant, sorry. being on that constant news struggle. And then hard news as opposed to soft news. Soft news is your cute things, the things that make you go, oh, that's your soft news. Your hard news is like so and so number of people passed away at, you don't say passed away, of course. This is news. Every word, especially in radio, every word takes up space. And so the less words, the better. Keep those sentences short, one thought per sentence. But hard news, reactionary kind of programs re-emerge, separated from curated expert current affairs talk shows. So I'm not sure if you ladies have any comment with regards to the two. What do you prefer? Do you like the down on the ground kind of hectic situation playing out, police chases and all these things? Or do you prefer current affairs talk shows where it's just a bunch of people talking about a particular issue, maybe a novel issue of law or something that interests you? I'm not sure if there's any comments there. Otherwise, what we'll do in this... Sorry.
Oh, yeah. For me, it's a little bit of both. I think there are times where like a hard news story will grab me, and I'll just like naturally gravitate towards it. Maybe it's a headline or just the story in general. But sometimes it gets extremely heavy, to a point where you just want, like, you deliberately just want to read or go for soft news, just to everywhere in the news, like on websites and newspapers, the moment you just try to engage the news, it's something hard. There's strikes, there's deaths, there's all sorts of things. So sometimes I mean, like I say, I gravitate towards the hard stuff, but I will go to the soft stuff to take a break from the hard stuff. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No,
So it's
absolutely.
a bit of both. It's a bit of both.
Oh, absolutely. I can totally relate to you. I mean, have you ever seen an old crime reporter? Like, it just doesn't happen. You've got young people in their 20s, 30s, maybe pushing it, but you really can't do the hard news thing. That hard news grind, you can't do that for a very long period of time. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your emotional health. It also makes you jaded. I realized I was when I was standing next to a corpse at the scene of a shack fire, and the gentleman had his stove had caught alight, knocked it over in his sleep, and I was standing next to him basically. And at that moment in time, it didn't even register that it was right there, because I still asked someone standing next to me, where's the body? And they pointed it out to me, and I'll never forget that piece of red. It haunts me now, but at the time, as a survival mechanism, I think maybe you kind of blank things out, because hard news pushes you to see the dark side of humanity, and it's ugly. So you can't do it for a sustained period of time, and it's important that I warn you, because nobody warned me. So I want you to jump into it and discover these things the hard way. But that having been said, the way they do news now is very different to the way we used to do it then. Now nobody goes to a shack fire. Then it was still a thing, because these people had basically just started getting cut full of, not being housed after all this time. So they started taking matters into their own hands, and then people started recording the fires, and then I think the emergency services workers were also pushing campaigns within these communities to get them to be fire safe. And so that was why there was all these media stories about shack fires. But now they don't send anyone to stuff like that. And I think it's for that reason, because of how traumatizing it can be. And a lot of journalists don't cope. A lot of them leave the field after, around my age. I'm sticking it out. I don't know why. Look, ladies, if we get cut, I'll just send you another invite link.
Mama, I wanted to ask something.
Sure.
Like, are you, as a journalist, let's say you're putting on hard news, are you allowed to be emotional or break or like cry or do something?
You are a human being. That is a very good question, but you are first and foremost a human being. And if crying is gonna help you to release that pain, then I would say you are allowed to cry if you need to cry. That's how I feel. I cry for everything, so I don't know. That's just me. But some people say, no, you shouldn't cry in front of your subjects. You shouldn't be vulnerable. But you're expecting them to be vulnerable in front of you, and yet you don't want to be vulnerable in front of them. You know what I mean? You're catching them in a moment. Say it's a crime victim. Like I was just thinking, the ANC was like, oh, we're going to go and visit those 8 women that were gang raped.
That's strange because the next
And this is where they're staying. We relocated them because somebody had leaked their contact details and their residential addresses online. So they relocated them. And that we're going there on this date and that's time and such minister and blah, blah, blah. And I was just thinking to myself, like, what do they hope to get from these women? What are they supposed to say? Yeah, I mean, did something really horrible happen to them, like horrific. You know what I'm saying? And you're trying to be all, just trying to score political points to say that you've been there, or you care, or I don't know what you're trying to say. But I just think that, yeah, you absolutely are allowed to show emotions, especially if you have such an intimate relationship with somebody where they're telling you something deeply personal that happened to them. And you know what I mean? Even if it's how they rescued their family from a fire, from a house fire, or whatever the case might be. You interview all kinds of people, no matter what kind of reporter you're going to be, whether it's TV, radio, or newspaper. You interview all manner of people in different walks of life, at different stages, experiencing different issues. And you've got to honor that. And I think part of that is by being true about who you are and true to yourself. Because that way you get the best out of your interviewee. I hope that answers your question.
No, yes, it does, ma'am. Thank you.
Cool. All right, analysis and politics. Analysis and commentary radio programs didn't just provide entertainment. They provided listeners with vocabulary to express their political ideas. Now that's the thing about radio. That's the magic about radio. How it introduces you to this world of voices and different perspectives and opinions. And you can just immerse yourself in them and reinvent yourself completely. Just reimagine yourself. You know what I mean? And your vocabulary improves. I mean, you're able to articulate yourself better. You understand yourself better because of listening to radio, talk radio. So this is where a little bit controversial of a question in journalism, because you know that as a journalist you are called upon to be completely objective. No subjectiveness, no self, just the facts and nothing else. Now, I would argue that that is unrealistic, because